So we're going to cover chapter 1 of the handbook today, Why Carbon? And we are joined with guest speaker, Dr. Richard Esposito from Southern Company. Dr. Esposito has over 3 decades of CCUS experience, and he also was one of the handbook authors. So we're very privileged to have him join us today. I do want to thank our funder and supporter for the handbook and all of this work, which is the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources. And with that, Richard, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Priya. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today and go over the first 2 chapters of the handbook. The handbook was an amazing opportunity for us to kind of get a really good stakeholder group in a room and develop something that I hope will be very meaningful to many different stakeholders. So I think the first thing that I'd like to just talk about is just the big key takeaways from the handbook. And I think we're all realizing at this point in time in our plight to decarbonize that CCUS is got to play a critical role. I just don't see especially from an energy standpoint, how we can decarbonize, society without decarbonized fossil fuels. Other industries such as cement, steel, they don't have options like we may have in the power industry, but they're going to need CCS to decarbonize. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that CCS is a very interesting opportunity for economic development. So we're already seeing this in the United States, and I think a few other countries that are embracing CCS at this point, that there are lots of high-paying jobs. There's lots of opportunities in CCS for a future workforce to develop, and it is very much a technology area that different countries could export expertise, but it is definitely an economic opportunity for developing countries. And then there's a lot of companies right now that are actually investing in CCS. They see the opportunity and the key benefits of investing in this technology and the returns that could potentially take place associated with that. I mean, CCS has been around for a long time. I mean, we actually, there was CCS projects operating back in 1996. So this is not really a new technology. It's putting it together on different industries and for different applications is kind of where the technology is going right now. And probably the most important thing, which is something we're going to talk about in this handbook, is kind of understanding the policy, the law, and the regulations. I mean, the technology is something very different. The engineers and the geologists and the physicists and the scientists deal with the technology, but having good policy, having regulations that facilitate deployment of the technology, and having the legal right to do the technology, whether it's in pore space or across international borders, is really important with this technology right now. And that's one area that we see as being a barrier to the commercial deployment. So, I mean, our energy transition, I mean, we're all, I think everyone's on board. Most people are on board that CO2 is a major contributor to climate change. I mean, it's the whole premise behind addressing this CCUS technology. You can disagree with, continuing to operate fossil fuels and putting CCS on fossil fuels, but CCS is going to be a necessary component of decarbonization, and specifically with carbon dioxide. So there's, over the years, slowly but surely, there's been a lot of policies and collaborative agreements, like, for example, the Paris Agreement climate goals, that have brought different countries together to work to deploy this technology. But we're finding more and more that we're going to need international collaboration and cooperation from multiple countries, and also the transformation of lessons learned from companies that are further along on the curve of deploying CCS. So there's a lot of things out there that we're going to learn from each other moving forward with respect to this technology. So I think we've also, all recognized that, there's going to be no single approach to addressing climate. I mean, it's going to take, all the tools in the workshop that, so to say, CCS will be a role in there, definitely a role. How much CCS plays a role, no one is really sure. I mean, there's predictions on that, but it looks to be a fairly significant part of any country's decarbonization portfolio is CCS. So let's just talk a little bit about what is CCS. I mean, I assume that most of our folks that are looking at this are somewhat familiar with it, but it's basically you have an emission source and you're capturing that emission source from either a point source, like a stack of emissions from a coal or a gas-fired power plant, or it might be more distributive sources, like maybe from an oil refinery where there's multiple sources and you're deploying CCS on that. You're taking that CCS, you're basically compressing it into a dense phase or a liquid. You're transporting it, and there's many different ways you can transport it, but the most common way is likely going to be in pipelines or boats. Interestingly enough, ships are being built to transport CCS. And then you can either utilize that CO2, you can use it or utilize it for, say, for enhanced oil recovery, producing more oil from oil fields, or you can pure store it, or you can put it in geological formations and just store the CCS in geological formations. So there's been a lot of regional collaborations that have been developed on CCS. Different organizations, such as in the United States, the Department of Energy is reaching out to international consortiums and developing that relationship, because lessons learned in transferring information from different countries to other countries is going to be very important. There's over 500 CCUS projects that have been planned and in various stages of development across the world, which is amazing. If you've been in this technology as long as I have, to hear the word 500, I remember when it was 10 or 15 or 20, but this is amazing. There's lots of networks and clusters that are developing, sharing of captured CO2 going into clusters for regional storage hubs, things like that are going to incentivize the deployment of the technology. And even in China, we're looking at a lot of CCS projects that are operational and moving forward on different industrial sectors, including coal. And Japan has made some very exciting announcements recently, so we're very excited to see that. The Tomakomai project was very interesting, and I was very impressed with that site. ISO standards have been working on. There's been ISO standards on how to store CO2 in geological formations, enhanced oil recovery. I mean, this is really important because this sets the stage for standardizing technology deployment and also for the risk assessment of these technologies moving forward and working with multilateral organizations, multi-country, for developing standards that work across the globe. So with that, thank you. This is the first part of the presentation on chapter 1.
Thank you so much, Richard. And yeah, stay tuned for additional recordings on the chapters. If you want to dive into anything that Richard's talked about on chapter 1, please take a look at the handbook. And again, thank you to our funder, the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources.